Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Cosmic Chronicles. I'm your host, Kyle Dayton. We're pleased to have as our guest this hour, retired Lieutenant Colonel Wendelle C. Stevens, here my cat's got my tongue, and also Rick Keefe. Rick Keefe is a video journalist on the quest for answers, as Wendelle as well. Wendelle has been researching for over 50 years into the UFO phenomenon. Rick is also a video journalist into the subject, also getting into, I guess, a little bit of government conspiracy, which you'll learn today here. Rick was born and raised right here in Tucson. Yeah. He is the creator and editor of the website www.ufohypothesis.com. That is ufohypothesis.com. And Rick is also an aspiring filmmaker who is also an author. He's working on a book about philosophy as we speak. Well, not as we speak directly, but his current project, among many others, is a book of philosophy that Rick's working on. And in this hour, we will be discussing Rick's documentary video entitled S4 Informants, in an attempt to answer this very basic question: is there a secret cabal of certain multinational corporations working with our military using extraterrestrial technology, or are working now with extraterrestrial groups? And has a separate government within the United States enacting above the law been created by this cabal? All right, and let me see, where do we start here? Rick and Wendelle, we thank you very much for being guests on the show, and thank you. It's good to see you again, Wendelle.
I would say that's exactly what we see, that we see a government behind the government controlling affairs.
Well, we're gonna hammer home with the facts and the information this hour, and I'm looking forward to having the talk on the show. And welcome again, and Rick, welcome to you.
Thank you. I'm excited to have the opportunity. This is the first time this Connor O'Ryan case is going to be discussed on live television, and only the second time ever Wendelle's talked about it in public, the first time being in 2001 at the International UFO Congress, and he's never given another lecture on it since, and I think this is a really important case, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to be able to talk about it.
Well, we are too, actually. Here, Rick, to start here. Cat's got my hair. Sorry, I'm just getting over, I think, a cold, and the cough is bad. All right. What is S4?
S4 is a laboratory facility. 4 levels are to us through a variety of informers. It's within the Area 51 confines in southern Nevada, northwest of the Nellis Air Force Base Range. And it's about 8.5 to 10 miles, I think, to the southwest of Groom Lake Naval Airfield. And S4 is alongside the southern border of the Papoose mountain range, right next to the Papoose dry lake bed there.
And what makes basically S4 at Area 51 so special?
What do you think, Wendelle?
Well, it appears that that was designated way back at the end of Project Red Light as a place to store captured alien extraterrestrial vehicles. And they began to accumulate them in big tunnels between Groom Lake and S4. There's a number of them out there now. And there's some specimens collected in a hangar facility at S4, according to the security guard that came to my house to tell me all about it.
Yes, and that's where the documentary S4 Informers starts.
Yes.
It seems to begin back in 1991 when a man named, what he went by the name of Connor O'Ryan, he contacts you to give you what he claims are photos and evidence from S4 that there are flying disc and preserved alien bodies at S4.
That's what he told me.
And Connor claims to have been a SEAL, I guess what they call a black SEAL, and also a sentry at level 2.
He was assigned as a Marine guard at level 2 of S4, and he walked a regular beat inside. And they worked on duty 4 hours and off 8 hours, on 4 hours and off 8 hours. So their schedules were constantly changing. And they had a sergeant of the guard that supervised their patrolling their beats, and they lived that way. They lived inside. They slept in the facility. Their meals were catered into them, and then the leftovers taken out. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. When they were initially assigned there, their names were taken away, and they were given numbers. Connor O'Ryan's number fit right in with 4 other numbers in sequence, showing that those 4 men came in together from different locations, all unknown to each other, all simultaneously assigned to the same facility. and also indicated the possibility that the team before them all left at one time for some strange reason also.
And Connor O'Ryan had a big claim too. He said that one of these photographs showed, who was the Secretary of Defense?
Dick Cheney in front of a bay, one of the hangar bays, with another man in a white coat looking at a UFO, a flying disc stored in that bay.
Man, now that would be something. So that's something. This was a full 9 years, I believe, before Dick Cheney was vice president.
Yes.
All right, and Connor O'Ryan also claimed that S4 was referred to as the museum. Why is that?
He said that internally they called it the museum, that there were other craft and bodies stored elsewhere that were more important and more recent than the ones in the museum.
Oh, goodness. And Connor O'Ryan, he told you that at S4 Level 2, where he was a sentry there, that there are 7 preserved alien bodies and 7 flying discs, including a disc, quoting him, and he got this on video too, saying this on your documentary, that this disc was apparently brought from the southwest U.S. and was apparently buried deep in rock sediment, at least 1,000 to 2,000 years old. And O'Ryan also produces a drawing of that disc on camera, and he said that some of the craft there didn't fog up, there was never any dust residue on them, and at least some of the discs had some kind of strongly magnetic properties on it, so strong that they had to slick their hair down with baby oil to keep from to keep from having their hair stand on end.
Yeah.
Is that true?
At this point, I'd like to also credit Wendell's grandson, Jim Cox, who did the videotaping of the testimony in which Connor O'Ryan, which was a pseudonym he was using, that wasn't his real name. Wendell later found out his actual name during the course of his stay at Wendell's home.
And we can mention that too later too.
But Jim Cox, Wendell's grandson, did a large portion of the filming and interviewing of Connor O'Ryan during that stay, and that was the second day. When you see the documentary and you get to see Connor O'Ryan's testimony, that was only the second day that Wendell and Connor O'Ryan were acquainted, and they filmed it on a hilltop because of Connor's deep fear that he was being pursued by Delta Force agents within his own group that were sent out to retrieve him and bring him back. So during this whole time there was a feeling of paranoia, a lot of worry, and Wendell accommodated him as best he could in his home while the man gave testimony to Wendell about the different things that were going on within the S4 facility.
We went out to a high point in the desert where we could see an approach from all angles, all directions, and interviewed him there where nobody could frustrate the interviewer to get in on it.
Yes, I understand.
And then we carefully secreted it so nobody would find out anything about it, and it was safely guarded by the Sheriff's Department.
I had a question when you mentioned Project Red Light. What is that?
Project Red Light was the project to convert the Groom Naval Auxiliary Airfield from that status to Area 51.
To a secret base, above top secret base. In fact, Wendell used to fly into Groom Lake on his way doing missions all the time, and one time they stopped him and said, you're no longer able to fly here.
Really?
Well, it says, where are your orders? And I said, what orders? They said, you have to have special orders to come in here. And they told me not to come back after that.
And then since that time, Wendell started pursuing information on Project Red Light, and actually even a couple at lectures that Wendell was giving him on the subject of UFOs later on.
I found Navy CB construction people that worked on Project Red Light that could tell me all about it, and they told me how all of the facilities at the base were relieved and transferred away one at a time, keeping the hospital complement and the reinforced Navy CB battalion to do the construction work, and the base engineers. The base engineers are civilians that build the bases to live there forever. And so after the work was well along on Red Light, the hospital was rotated out, new hospital teams brought in to replace them, and the whole base was converted slowly until it became the secret base it is now.
Oh my goodness. And once they achieve high security or top secret status, then can they skirt laws and things like that? And there's no accounting for what they're doing back there.
If you're not allowed, if the Congress isn't allowed to go onto the base, if the media is not allowed to go on the base, if there's no external investigation of what's going on in a certain facility, and it's above top secret, they could be doing anything they want.
That's true.
And they literally do.
Yeah, that's what I understand that, you know, and Good time to mention Edward Teller also connected to S4, and he was also the head of the Atomic Energy Commission.
Yes.
How was Edward Teller connected to S4?
Edward Teller was the head of S4. He was the head of Atomic Energy Commission out of his headquarters at Los Alamos, which controls all of Area 51, Area 9, all the areas in the atomic energy sites, including S4 and all the others, are all connected together under Edward Teller, who told people he knew nothing about UFOs, which is a big lie, because in 1968, after we had a crashed UFO in our hands for months and been making no progress, he convened the Progress Review Conference at Los Alamos, where he had 18 scientists, engineers around a big table. And across from my friend that contacted me early on while he was still working with this alien extraterrestrial, alive one,
Bill
that was
Uhouse.
Bill
brought to
Uhouse.
Area 51 willingly and taken care of there by our government. They provided his habitat facility, his food, his everything for him. He was brought to the conference with 18 scientists around the table, and they put him in a white shirt and slacks to make him look a little less alien, but he still had the disproportionately large head with the big black eyes,
Yes.
no hair follicles.
Uhouse alleged that this meeting took place in 1968, and regarding Teller, Teller was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission for decades.
He chaired the table.
In
my
fact,
goodness.
if somebody holds a position of authority for decades like Teller did, that would be like a president having 10 consecutive terms.
Yes.
And after that, it becomes more or less a dictatorship where somebody has complete control. Now, if somebody's controlling, like Teller, controlling the Atomic Energy Commission, they can direct a lot of things through their own desires that maybe isn't in the best interest of the public.
Right.
Yeah.
And another thing that's very interesting about Edward Teller is that he was the one who really pushed for the Strategic Defense Initiative in the early 1980s through the Reagan administration, and he was the godfather of SDI. So a lot of what Teller did and has done before he passed away finally, because I think he did a lot of damage to the world, was done without any supervision above him. He basically called the shots. And it's also interesting about Teller that he came over from Germany as during the period of World War II, and just like a lot of other scientists did in Operation Paperclip, where a lot of the ex-Nazi scientists and SS officers were repatriated into the United States and put into super secret facilities to carry on their science and their rocket testing. And Teller was a part of that.
And I wanted to mention, too, we had talked about multinational corporations before. I understand that the corporation Bechtel has their hands buried in S4.
They run Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. They run Los Alamos. In fact, you can go to sites all over the internet and just see the long list of what Bechtel's involved in. They were involved in the first experimental nuclear breeder reactor. They built Hoover Dam. They did the BART system. They did the list of their accomplishments as far as architecture marvels is extremely high, but they're also a privately owned company. So, and they receive black budget funding, so they're not allowed to be examined by Congress. They're not allowed to be examined by the public. There are no public shares in Bechtel, so there's no auditing of their accounting. So they can say anything they want and do anything they want. And what really troubles me is what they've done recently in Bolivia, where the Bolivian people finally stood up to them, but they were trying to privatize the water supply. So not only do they run most of the atomic installations on the planet, or have built them, or have had a hand in their construction, but now they're trying to control our water supply.
Oh, and the person who controls the water and the food, basically, and the water runs the world.
Energy and water, these are things, these are the lifeblood of the planet, of the human population. You need energy to perform your daily tasks. You need water to survive. And if somebody's monetizing all that and controlling it, that's one step away from a dictatorship.
That's right, and it becomes a big business with our interests and our less and less important. It's all the bottom line. It's the dollar.
Right.
Follow the money.
Government has no control.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of a brainless, mindless thing. It's just kind of scary what you uncovered here in the documentary. I wanted to ask about the Open Skies Treaty member nations. What is that?
Okay, the Open Skies Treaty was basically a treaty that was set up, I think it was in March of 1994, but I'm not positive on that date. And that was a treaty that allowed certain member nations like the Soviet Union, Turkey, different other countries to be able to do flyovers over Area 51 in exchange for our government being able to do satellite flyovers over any of their installations. So it gave the United States a really big leverage in being able to spy on other member nations so that those other nations would have maybe a glimpse to get an idea of what might be going on at S4 and Area 51.
Oh, yeah.
But from what Wendelle learned from Connor O'Ryan and other key informants like Phil Schneider and other people that were featured in the documentary, Bob Lazar, is that when they know when S4 and Area 51, they know when these satellites are going to approach. And when they do, what do, Wendell?
They bring everything inside and close the doors. And the Russians see nothing.
So it was a really
camouflage.
lopsided treaty that these other member nations signed on to.
Yeah, that's kind of like that's half-truths. Well, you can fly over, but we'll have everything out of the way, so
we
you
know
won't
where
get
you
to
are.
see it.
We'll close the doors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's just so honest, isn't it? That's all above board
Well, it's
here.
just like what President Clinton did with Area 51 when Professor Turley was suing on behalf of the widows of workers who had died in Area 51.
Yes.
And what Clinton did after Judge Philip Pro of Nevada had ruled that that this case could go on, Clinton ordered an executive decree that made it impossible for anybody to examine. They cited state secrets privileges regarding Area 51, and no further investigation could continue, which shut down the court case. Turley appealed to the Ninth Circuit. They refused to hear the case. He went to the Supreme Court. They refused to hear the case. So that basically cut off any remuneration to the widows of the men who died from hazardous waste at Area 51, and that's the way they operate.
It's very unethical, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Very unethical, and that's how they operate there. I wanted to get back to Connor O'Ryan briefly. You got a chance to look at some of his documentation in his wallet. You got a chance to do that when he was staying at your house, and you saw there was a W-4 in there, and there was ID indicating that his real name was actually
Derek Hennessy.
Derek Hennessy. And according to the W-4 the W-4 form, that it was Derek Hennessy. They were paying not Connor O'Ryan, I believe.
They were paying Derek Hennessy.
Derek Hennessy.
A salary equivalent to a lieutenant colonel in the military on top of his Marine pay.
Wendell kept that name in secret for 10 years because he didn't want to take a chance that if he released the name of Hennessy, well, actually, he kept the whole case quiet for 10 years.
I never knew whether, I knew he was a card-carrying CIA officer, so I never knew whether it was a ploy to bring me down or not.
Well, you know, when the document, the W-4 document was shown on your documentary, which, by the way, is on YouTube, anyone wants to see it, it's called S4 Informers. Thank you. You did a great job on this. It's a big, huge 6.5 hour long documentary. You've got to see it. I have a question there on Connor O'Ryan's document on his W-4, where it says at the top, Central Intelligence Agency, Langley, Virginia. They spell it L-A-N-G-L-Y. And also, too, I guess there's a hit order that is supposedly on CIA letterhead that Connor had that also has the word Langley misspelled. Do you think that was deliberate? Or some people say, well, that would be a hoax because it's misspelled. But why do you think that document was misspelled?
I don't know. That may be the official name. The Langley I used, I spelled the way it's spelled naturally to me, L-A-N-G-L-E-Y.
Yeah, G-L-E-Y,
and that may
that's
have been
right.
incorrect.
Yes.
Because I don't have the official document.
Well,
I do have the one copy.
L-E-Y is how it's spelled on all the maps and
yeah.
their documentation, but on his it's spelled L-A-N-G-L-Y.
Well, my idea, as far as that goes, is that it could be plausible denial. If you're releasing documentation that you don't want to get on public hands, you might want to have it with air or here, so it could be argued, one way or the other.
That could be.
Yeah.
That could be. And then also, too, there was a little bit of controversy in regard to, Wendell, when you talked to Connor O'Ryan and you didn't press him for like his rank or his serial number, or when did he graduate from training, or when did he enter the Navy and this and that. How would you answer those critics?
Well, I didn't need it at the time. He was just giving me information, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow of information, so I just let him talk. And later we tried to clear more of that up, but in other conversations. He would convince me that he was a black seal. People questioned that. I had people tell me that there was no record of black seals.
Yes, and no such thing. Yeah.
He had a special tattoo that he got when he graduated from all the stages that the black seals go through. That's the top of the line. They do everything, underwater demolitions and everything. And then they get a tattoo on the bicep here, and in the center is a shield with a space for hash marks. And for every special mission, he got a special hash mark and a bonus. And he was proud of his black seal status. He always kept it covered.
In fact, Dr. Michael Salad just forwarded me an email and forwarded it to Wendelle earlier this week regarding black seals, because there's been some people trying to discredit the NOMR, black seal.
Yeah, saying there's no such thing. Yes.
There's no such thing. And, Connor O'Ryan said he was a black seal, so that's what Wendelle reported. But this email from an anonymous, we'll leave him as an anonymous informant, said that Black SEAL was a type of Navy SEAL that did operations outside the normal purview of the U.S. Navy and in conjunction with the CIA.
So it'd be like Black Ops SEAL.
It was
only Black SEALs know who Black SEALs are.
Oh, I see.
And the direct supervision of those Black SEAls.
Okay, because I guess there's some Navy SEAls too. That's where there's a gentleman that's that has a website that said, well, I did my research. I'm a Navy SEAL. There's no such thing as a black SEAL.
There's going to be a lot of people that want to shut this information down, that are going to want to discredit it. But what I'd like people to do is look at the whole documentary and look at all the evidence of all the different witnesses.
Yes.
You've got Bob Lazar, you've got Phil Schneider, you've got Connor O'Ryan, you've got Philip Corso, you've got William Cooper, you've got Bill Uhouse. You have all these different men of different ages, different backgrounds, a lot of them affiliated with the U.S. Navy, coming out and saying, and the U.S. Navy is the one that operates or is, in charge in terms of the 4 branches of the military in charge of Groom Lake. And you've got all these different witnesses coming out, and a lot of their testimony, as you're going to show later on, overlaps and conjuncts. So I'd like people to maybe think about the minutia, the details, but look at the overall case.
Yes.
There's an interesting thing. You mentioned Bill Uhouse. He told me early after he came out to see me for the first time, but he says, we're all given control names when we're assigned to the job. That's my control name. That's what I'm paid under. That's what I'm registered under. But that's not my real name. He says we are all fakes. So everybody that works there is working under a pseudonym, a false name.
Yes.
They don't use their real names. And I found that very interesting, that none of them had their true identity.
I find that interesting in the corporate world, too, when you see these banking scandals going on like recently, how they'll collapse one bank, they'll bring it up, another bank, the FDIC will take control of it, it'll get ceded to another bank, they change the names, they move everything around. It's a giant
it's like a shell game.
That's exactly how our government operates. It's a giant shell game. Try and follow the money if you can quick enough, because they're just going to keep shuffling it around, changing the names, moving everything around, renaming everything, and it's something historically done for the last several hundred years.
Yeah, understood that. I wanted to ask you, Wendelle, when Connor O'Ryan was afraid about having photographs on his person, so when he went to mail them to you, they got lost on the bus on the way there?
He had a package with him, and he said that he noticed a man standing in front of the magazine rack pretending to read the magazine, but looking over the top of it at him. So he moved. And then later he saw the man had taken up a new position with a newspaper doing the same thing. He moved again, and the man showed up watching him, so he got a little paranoid, and he went out behind the bus station to look for something to hide the package of pictures he was carrying. And he found an old starter box, a solid cardboard box. Put the package of pictures in it and some rocks, and wanted to get it on the bus with him, but the bus was leaving in less than an hour, and they said they couldn't make that be in the next morning. Of course, it never arrived.
It never arrived.
But he had 6 stashes of photos, and he later did retrieve one of those stashes and showed it to
Jim Delatoso?
Jim Delatoso up in Phoenix, when Jim Cox, Wendell's grandson, and Connor O'Ryan went on a trip to Phoenix to Jim Delatoso's ranch to do work for Jim Delatoso regarding a supercomputer. That would have been Jim Cox, not Connor O'Ryan, doing that work, but Connor tagged along. And in that time, they were accosted in a house a bungalow outside of the main Delatoso ranch, and also during that time when Connor O'Ryan and Jim Cox were on Delatoso's ranch, Connor O'Ryan showed Delatoso the photos, and in this documentary we interviewed Delatoso, and he describes what he saw in those photos.
Yes.
And some of the experiences surrounding that stay of Connor O'Ryan at Delatoso's ranch is quite shocking, including dismembered body parts.
Yeah, I dismember a severed finger,
Ninjas running across his lawn at night. Just a number of very
straddling his legs in bed at night with an AK-47 pointed at their heads,
Jeez,
and the man
that's crazy.
searching their little shaving kits looking for
So it
something.
wasn't just one man making allegations. There
Yeah.
was a number. There was Bob Dean involved as being a witness. There was Wendelle Stevens, Jim Cox, Jim Delatoso, all that heard the case. They all took down evidence
Yes.
of what was going on, and their testimony really supports the fact that what was going on with Connor O'Ryan wasn't just one crazy man
Yes.
making up a story.
That would indicate that. And also at the time, Jim says that he couldn't verify the authenticity of the photos. He thought it was interesting, but he wasn't. You know, his impression about this and the entire situation at the time was he thought it was very violent in its attitude, you know, with the severed finger and the fact that Connor O'Ryan says, you know, I was a hired killer and they're going to kill me if they catch me.
all the time, loaded guns.
Showed
and the whole-
pictures of the
Yeah.
dead bodies.
Yes, and showed pictures of-
not just regular pictures, but Polaroids,
Yes.
which are much harder to doctor and fake than,
Oh.
you know, and back at that time,
Yeah.
computers were just coming up. It's not
Yes.
as sophisticated now with what you can do with Photoshop.
That's right.
But those were Polaroid pictures of dead human beings murdered by Connor O'Ryan. That Connor
That's what
was
he claimed,
asked
yes.
to take pictures of the bodies and take them back to his
So he would
mission.
prove
on
that
his
he
special
did it.
missions.
Is that how, like,
Correct.
proof that he did what he was supposed to do?
Part of the proof.
You know, and I have a question too, again on the photographs, is you and John Lear went to the Las Vegas bus terminal with a key that Connor O'Ryan had given you, and he drew a map as to which locker at the bus station
Exactly,
these
and the key.
pictures would be in. So what happened when you got there?
Well, we had key number 24. We looked for the bank of lockers with the locker number 24, and the whole bank was gone. So we went to the manager of the bus station there and says, what happened to my locker? All my clothes and money and passports are in it, and it's gone. He said, oh, the concessionaire rotates those. I said, well, where's the concessionaire? He said, gave me a telephone number. He said, you can call him. So we went to the concessionaire. He said, oh, yeah. He said, we changed a couple of lockers over there. I said, well, where are they? They've got my passports, money, and everything in them.
Yes.
He said, I'll have to try to find out where it went. I'll do some research. Call me tomorrow. And, of course, we never heard from him again either.
It's like your check's in the mail.
Yeah.
Sure it is.
But they were gone.
That just makes you wonder what's going on there. And also, too, in regard to Connor O'Ryan, there were some cryptic notes left, and in one of the notes that was left was supposedly by one of his Delta Force team members that were watching him. They weren't mentioned the word Malakia.
Yeah,
on
so I
there,
asked, that was at the bottom of the note. There's a hand-scribed note.
That was one of the
I
last
turned to Connor and said, what's Malakia?
years.
and that
He said-
Malaki.
He said, that's serious. He said, they won't hesitate to take out your whole neighborhood if necessary to get what they want.
Would that have to do with, what was it, a bus explosion?
He
They were
said
trying to
they
get one
killed all the
guy,
people on the bus to get one man.
and that was connected to the word Malakia?
Right,
Yeah.
and he also
Okay.
brought Wendell a newspaper clipping that showed a helicopter crash that happened within the Area 51
Yeah.
perimeter, and showing that the
He said one of those men on the helicopter
Three.
was wanted.
three, if I remember right,
Well,
There were
three?
several.
three
Yeah.
of the men on that helicopter were killed in regard to
goodness.
this accidental helicopter
Information that
crash.
they had that they wanted to stop.
All right. And here we come to Robert Lazar, and the nuclear physicist, and his connection to S4, and that's a very controversial case. And according to Bob Lazar, in the conversation that he had with, I believe it was John Lear, did he speak to John Lear? Or,
Yes, yes.
Bob Lazar, he said that Bob
And George
claimed,
Knapp.
and George Knapp.
was one of the
Yeah.
primary investigators, one of the most accredited journalists in the world. In fact, he just won the Peabody Award for journalism in regard to a water scandal and use of the water system up in Las Vegas, where he works out of KLAS TV.
Yes,
and
Channel
he
8.
broke the story on Bob Lazar.
Yes, and
But
Area 51. He was
John
the-
Lear helped bring that story to George Knapp. Yeah.
Well, according to to the reports, Robert Lazar claims that he worked at S4 and that he saw live aliens as well as flying discs there. And I say Lazar, when he contacted KLS TV reporter George Knapp about his story. And in the documentary, you interview John Lear, and John claims that Bob first saw the flying disc that he called, quote, the sport model, which was being tested outside of the S4 installation hangar.
Now, John, let me talk about John Lear for a second. John knows quite a bit. He's the son of the pioneer of Learjet, the founder of the Learjet.
And he's a pilot as well, too.
And his brother invented the Lear continuous tape, cassette tapes.
And he held every pilot's license available through the FAA. Wow. There aren't many men like that in the world. He also worked for Air America. He's admitted in the interview to me, we did a 4-hour interview over a whole day's period at John Lear's home back in November of 2009. And during that interview, he admitted that he did work for Air America. So he knows the dirty, dark side of the U.S. government, and he's willing to talk about it. In fact, his investigations right now are centering on 9/11 and the moon. And John Lear is another researcher like Wendelle Stevens who really needs to be paid attention to.
Yes,
he has a lot of very important information.
He does. He's got a lot of insider information, and I know that Wendelle, to your
because men
walking encyclopedia
within the military are willing to come out to certain other men in the military who they respect, who they know are independents.
Yes.
Wendell's an independent. John Lear's an independent.
Yes. And also, too, you know, John Lear says that Lazar talks about specifically 3 projects that are going on at S4. One was Project Galileo, which Lazar was involved in, and that had to do with gravity propulsion.
Yep.
And then there was Project Sidekick, which had to do with neutron beam weapons. And Project Looking Glass, which involved the physics of seeing back in time. Mm-hmm. And Bob didn't know a lot about those last 2, but he was familiar with the Project Galileo. And he also claims that Bob told him that while at S4 he saw a holographic book that had to do with the history of humans and extraterrestrial contact and our history of this on the planet kind of thing. So that'd be very interesting, a holographic
By the way, we
history
have
book.
just redesignated Solar Warden as the 10th fleet. We now have a 10th fleet.
Well, that's very
It's
interesting.
spacecraft.
That's interesting there. Let me see, and it's mind-blowing every time I listen to the show and listen to my guests here. John Lear also quotes Bob Lazar as saying that a small segment of the U.S. government that makes scientific and technological judgments from a knowledge base that is not available to the general public.
This is right out of Gene Huff's documentary on Bob Lazar called Excerpts from the Government Bible.
And he also quoted about how the technology was brought here by some alien beings from the Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 star system. Talks about that, and eventually Robert left S4. And John Lear says that Bob Lazar absolutely doesn't want to talk about S4, and I guess because you had mentioned that now that he has his clearance back, it's kind of I don't know if it's a voluntary thing of keeping his mouth shut or what have you, but the thing is too, how Lazar felt in one of his quotes, he said that the hardware and the technology he was exposed to should be placed in the proper hands of the scientific community, and it is the right of every person on Earth to know that there is physical evidence which proves that there is life elsewhere and that at least one form of life has been here. And by voluntarily keeping quiet about what he knows, he's scoring apparently contrary to what he really would prefer to do.
Now, the Bob Lazar story has been optioned for a major motion picture. Once again, it's, I think, the fourth or fifth time, according to Gene Huff, that it has been optioned for a major motion picture. So we may get a really good film treatment of that subject here in the near future if that deal goes through.
All righty, you know, and just a moment, I wanted to show the clip of the famous video from STS-48, and on your documentary, Richard C. Hoagland, I believe he's an astrophysicist. Is he an astrophysicist or a researcher?
He's a Jet Propulsion Laboratory physicist who sat side by side with Walter Cronkite during the Apollo missions, giving the nation insight into what we were doing as we were circling the moon or landing on the moon. He's a well-established, credible scientist, spoken at the United Nations, Ohio State University, throughout the world actually, and he's one of the best leading-edge scientists that we have that can really analyze the information that we see. The STS-48 tape, by the way, was originally taped when NASA was still doing live feeds by Donald Ratch. So we got to give Don Ratch credit for this too.
Thank you, Donald. It's a brilliant piece of film, and it's from NASA, and And momentarily we will show the STS-48 clip, and it shows, and Richard's voice will be heard over the background. And there's
Now,
the
pay
clip.
attention to your screen at the top center. You'll see a dot of light appear and begin to move from right to left. Watch carefully. The dot will turn hard right in apparent response to a brief flash from the lower left. 3 seconds later, 2 contrails move sharply upward from the lower left.
That was a maser beam that flashed past.
That's amazing.
The satellite.
Now that shows something that there's some kind of consciousness or some kind of control in it, because it's flying along and all of a sudden the flash happens and this thing moves out of the way, changes course, and then there's something that's shot at it that you can see.
Brilliant pebbles is what the name of that laser type of looking weapon is that's shot out at the craft. And in Hoagland's analysis, he does a scientific analysis of that footage and determines that that object was 1,700 miles away from the camera.
Yes.
And also that that craft moved at 14,000 Gs.
Yes.
We have nothing like that in our science that moves at 14,000
Yep.
Gs.
It was 15 miles per second, or 54,000 miles an hour, and it accelerated in less than 2 seconds to over 200,000 miles per hour, or 14 Gs. We don't have
14,000.
14,000 Gs? Oh, because he mentioned 4. Okay. There's nothing that we have that does that,
No.
that we know of.
No.
So, so this is possibly
That
our
was one of our
technology?
first solar warden intercepts.
Oh. So then this is our technology, then, you believe?
It's
That's
our
our technology,
technology.
and they're testing it? And that's what Hoagland claims, that one of his theories is that NASA film caught a so-called Star Wars weapon system using our own technology. And if we had a chance to maybe show that once again, I'd love to show it again before we goes on. It's a very fascinating clip, and it's not an asteroid, it's not swamp gas, it's something that's very consciously moving, and it'll blink
Now,
into
pay
the
attention
center.
to your
Okay,
screen
there we
at the
go.
top center. You will see a dot of light appear and begin to move from right to left. Watch carefully. The
It's
dot will
interesting,
turn
Kyle, because
hard right
NASA, after
in
this
apparent
was
response
released,
to a brief
decided
flash
to cut
from the
the
lower
live
left.
feed.
No more
that's-
light.
3 seconds
now it
later,
only
2
shows these
contrails
A
move
delayed
sharply
feed?
upward
Correct.
Oh,
from
so they
the
can
lower
censor
left.
it.
So they can censor and control it.
Now watch this thing take off. You saw the flash, and oops, there it goes, out of the atmosphere. Boom! That's amazing.
Yep.
And then there were other little lit objects too that you noticed. The more you watch that clip, there's like other things that are
Moving around
in
that atmosphere.
Yes, and they're kind of going with the main movement on there, and they're reacting in reaction to what's going on with the main
Yeah.
function.
There are a
whatever
lot
that-
of UFO researchers that have studied the STS tapes over the last couple decades, and a lot of them have made really brilliant captures of anomalous objects out there. So there is a lot available to view in terms of the STS tapes out there, if you're so interested.
Yes, and you have the time and the patience. I think it's well worth it in the long run when you get those gems like that.
Yeah.
Now this brings us to Gary McKinnon, the cyber hacker who broke into the Pentagon's computer and the FBI's computer and supposedly found evidence of UFO contact, aliens, technology. He mentioned something about there was a release about, he found information about, quote, non-terrestrial officers and, quote, fleet-to-fleet transfers.
Yes.
And then you go into the documentary and say that we have patrol discs in the UFO fleet or squadron of UFOs secretly controlled by the U.S. military. So that could possibly be connected with STS.
Carrie
That's called
Cassidy
USS, and number one's USS Forrestal, and the other one is USS, the guy that headed SAC.
That's amazing. There it
And
is.
Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot has done some did a really fine interview with Gary McKinnon,
Yes.
and that's worth watching too. If you go to the Project Camelot website, you'll be able to watch that and a number of other very good interviews as well.
He's a brilliant young man. I think he has Asperger's syndrome, but he's brilliant. I mean, he showed
Yeah.
the loopholes.
The
in
USSS stands for United States Space Ship.
Oh, that's
Naval
very
ships that
interesting.
you see are US something, USN something.
Now,
That's very
the U.S. government has spent over 7 years trying to extradite Gary McKinnon from
Yep.
Great Britain. He's a British citizen,
Yes.
and there's been a large, long-lasting fight between McKinnon's lawyers and the U.S. government trying to get him delivered over to the United States.
So they can silence it.
Now, why would the U.S. be so interested in
A hippie type.
a hippie
Yeah, there you
type
go. He's a young
investigating
kid.
something
Biggest
called
computer in the
UFOs when
world, living with
UFOs
his
don't
wife.
exist?
I think if the government were smart, they'd want to hire him to work for them.
Yeah.
You know, he's brilliant, brilliant, absolutely. With Bill Uhouse, I wanted to mention him too. He was a jet flight simulator mechanical engineer. We should say the late Bill Uhouse, God rest
Grew
his
up
soul.
inside.
Passed away last year.
Yes, and he claimed to also have worked at S4.
Yes.
And then you say that S4 became a simulator facility mostly to train new pilots to fly our new aircraft,
That's
which
right.
would fit in why Bill Uhouse was there. And then you further mention in the documentary that Mr. Uhouse also claimed that at S4 he worked closely with an alien named J-Rod.
J-Rod,
the one that
yes.
you mentioned that they put in the meeting, they put him in the normal white-looking clothes and
Yeah,
a
that's
shirt
the
to try
one,
to make.
yes.
Yes, it's spelled
They had
J-A-R-O-D.
telepathic contact, J-Rod and Bill Uhouse, and that's part of how he translated his Zeta Reticulan science, that the corporations that were working with inside S4 through government contracts like General Electric that were developing these type of technologies, he would translate it to Uhouse, and Uhouse would help fabricate flight simulators. That was Uhouse's specialty,
Yeah.
flight simulator.
In the big conference in Los Alamos,
In
they finally
1968,
decided
yes.
the alien was able to convey through his co-worker, Bill Uhouse, that the reason we were making no progress is because it takes a certain amount of mental input to make their technology work, and we have never learned to impart the mental input.
Boy, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And they also ended up calling Bill Uhouse J-Rod number 2 or
Yeah, but
J-Rod
J-Rod,
2.
at that time, J-Rod was free out there. He had a special habitat. He could fly his craft around. He could go all over the country. He was not detained. Then he got ill and passed on. The new J-Rod that is being treated at Los Alamos is a different entity altogether.
And this is focused on in Volume 2 of S4 Informers, the Bill Uhouse material.
All right, I'm going to show a clip in just a moment here. And then Bill Uhouse also claimed that there's a group of multinational corporations involved with the U.S. military and with certain extraterrestrial groups, and they're covertly hiding the existence of ETs and their secret back engineering program, and that this group is acting as a separatist nation state. Uhouse also said that there was a, quote, satellite government, different than either our shadow government or the United States government. Edward Teller, here he's up in the cover-up. Edward Teller publicly stated he knew nothing about Bob Lazar or UFOs. You know, sometimes they say, well, I don't know anything about UFOs. He could be telling the truth, like Dr. Sella says, because they know what they are. So when he says, I don't know anything about UFOs, he's really telling the truth because they've identified them. And he claimed that he didn't know Bob Lazar, but didn't he help clear him to work at
produced
S4?
a photograph standing in front of his house in Los Alamos with Edward Teller looking at a jet car that Bob Lazar had built with an airplane jet engine in a race car.
And there was a newspaper article about it too. Yes, go ahead. I was going to.
Well, I haven't seen that photograph, but I have, in regards to Teller, he did, according to Lazar, hire Lazar for work at S4. So Lazar's testimony states that he got the contract through EG&G with Teller's help, helping him get a position within the S4 facility to help on the gravitational work that was needed in the Project Galileo project.
Oh, I see, that makes sense. You know, and also too, speaking of information that's coming out, we had some corroborating information that was supplied to 2 different people by the late Colonel Wilson, and also supplied to you by Connor O'Ryan as a drawing, and momentarily we'll show the clip of that, comparing it.
Colonel Steve Wilson.
Yeah, Colonel Steve Wilson. Yeah. Colonel Wilson, he was given his
and they had
testimony.
a copy of it doing the reviewer, taking down the questions and answers and all kinds of additional notes. Agnes Sojak painted this painting by verbal description from Colonel Steve Wilson as she painted, with him correcting as she painted. You notice the one in Bay 1 is identical to the one that Connor O'Ryan sketched. Notice Bay 2, 3, and 4 have identical craft with the same ship as Connor also substantially sketched in his drawings.
in secret. He had
Yes.
never made it public at that point. And what happened was Colonel Steve Wilson came out, found out he had a cancer, felt that it had been administered by his superiors because he knew too much. He was in charge of Project Pounce, which was in charge of retrieving objects, crashed aerial objects, and taken back to S4. And so when he realized he had cancer and felt that it had been given to him by superiors, just as Connor O'Ryan did when he finally left S4, he went to Italy, and at Italy he decided to go to a UFO conference, met Robert Pinotti. Pinotti hired an artist to do that painting under Colonel Steve Wilson's direct supervision. Then Wilson went in the United States and sat down with Richard Boylan, Dr. Richard Boylan, and Bill Hamilton gave more testimony. They set up a hasty UFO conference because they knew Wilson didn't have many days to live. 2 weeks later, the conference was about to take place. The day before the conference, he dies mysteriously in a Phoenix hospital and was never able to go before the media and make his testimony.
He died of a fast-acting form of brain cancer.
Phil Schneider, also who talks about underground bases and tunnels, he was found murdered within 9 months after giving his testimony. And some of his most important testimony is included in this documentary, where he outs a number of companies, including Mitsubishi, Bechtel, General Electric, a number of others who are getting all these secret government black budget funding to do this type of science, and then seed it to themselves, knowing which companies are going to come out with this new technology, and so they know exactly which companies to invest their dollars in.
That's right.
And become very, very wealthy.
Well, it's business. It's all business.
The good old boys network.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I had a little bit of corroborating information about claims that there were aliens at S4. These claims have been separately made by Connor O'Ryan / Derek Hennessy, Robert Lazar, Bill Uhouse, and Colonel Steve Wilson. And as shown by the previous clip, corroborating evidence is there, apparent corroborating evidence indicating that 2 different men saw these craft in the bays on level 2 at area S4. And also, 2, there was art made of aliens. So we're going to show you Colonel Steve Wilson's result at the painting from Agnes Shojek, who painted it.
Had also sketched a tank holding the alien bodies, and Agnes Shojek had made the same painting under the detailed description of Colonel Steve Wilson that shows 6 cylinders which show bodies in tanks being held by a band around the waist. And notice the regulator on the side of the tank, just exactly as it was sketched by Connor O'Ryan 4 years earlier. So I thought that this might be enough confirmation, since we had no other information which we could rely on to confirm the Connor O'Ryan story, and I decided to release it at that point.
Knowledge. And Wendelle only allowed me to release it after it being hidden away for 18 years.
Oh my goodness.
And Wendelle, you know, in his older age decided, and wisdom decided it's finally time to release this and make this public.
Amen
and I
to
thank him
that.
for it. Thank you, Wendelle.
Yes, thank you very much. Colonel Wilson, there's also a strange story on the documentary that I won't go into now, but it had to do with a glowing plane, and he was unconscious. The plane landed, and there was a strange glow around it that was witnessed by people.
Flew for 3 days without refueling, landed with the same amount of fuel aboard as when he called in, with dying at the controls, and made a belly landing and rolled out, or not a belly landing, rolled out on the runway, but he was rescued and taken to the hospital, and he survived.
He was unconscious when the plane landed.
He was unconscious when it landed.
That's incredible, and his wound had started to heal.
3 days after he was shot.
That's very strange. That's something that would be beyond my comprehension, but I think he was being watched out for.
And then his IQ took a dramatic rise.
Yes, from a 162 or 160 something to a 232, his IQ had risen. Absolutely amazing. He was also very telepathic too. I was reading on Dr. Boylan's writings about him
Somebody
too.
you would think the dark side, and that's what I call these people, I guess.
Yes.
If you know, if you want to oversimplify it, but you know, you would think they would want to keep somebody like Colonel Steve Wilson in their corner. But what the modus operandi of this group is, just like with what Orion was doing, his 18th hit right before he came to Wendelle Stevens and made his information public, gave his information to Wendelle Stevens, was that he had performed an assassination on another secret special agent for the government over in Budapest, Hungary. So what they do is they use people until they know too much, or they could spill the beans, as you like to say,
and terminate them.
and then they terminate them.
Yeah. Colonel Wilson also reported of a group called the Military Agency for Joint Intelligence, or MAGI, And he claimed that the highest level of this group is level 33, which included Henry Kissinger and Edward Teller.
Right.
They are both in
Henry
the executive
Kissinger
board.
is a big player in all
Yes.
of this and very involved in mind control experiments.
Yes, MK Ultra and all those other. And level 32 is what they call MJ12, Majestic 12, or Magic 12. And there were 36 members, including Kissinger and Teller, in this group in 1994. Level 31 is someone like Ben Rich of Lockheed Skunk Works. And Colonel Wilson also reportedly said that the Lockheed X-22A disc was based originally on an ET disc, and that what he said was space warfare with military astronauts are already a
We got to
reality.
give Dr. Richard Boylan credit because he
Yes.
brought a lot of this information out, and there's a very good lecture that he gave that's available through the UFOcongress.com website that where Richard Boylan gives testimony about Colonel Steve Wilson, and that's also a must-view in my opinion.
That sounds good there. And then before his death, and at the urging of Dr. Boylan, Colonel Wilson created what they call a Star Wars city chart, which is the blueprint of the shadow government financed by the Rockefellers, according to the late Colonel Wilson. And according to Dr. Boylan, Colonel Wilson had also claimed that Bobby Ray Inman, CIA Naval Intelligence Admiral, U.S. Navy, had control over the company called Decision Science Applications Incorporated, and that this DSA Incorporated is a group made up of all the heads of the military hardware manufacturing in the black area. And there was a gentleman named, did you want to?
I really got to
Add to
jump
that?
in here, Kyle, because I
Absolutely.
want to say that one of the photos that Conor O'Ryan showed to Jim Delatoso up in Phoenix was a picture of Bobby Ray Inman and Cheney together within S4. So those two have been very central in the control of this facility and been very big players. And we got to go back and talk about Cheney here
Okay,
because
we have 5 minutes to closing roll,
we
so
must
go
talk
ahead
about
and
Cheney
throw
before
it
we
in.
finish.
Oh yes, this is what the whole subject is. On March 16th, the 2009 Democratic Congressman Dennis Kucinich called on the House Oversight Chairman for an investigation and formal congressional probe into the claims made by investigative reporter Seymour Hersh that Dick Cheney was running, quote, an executive assassination ring from the vice presidential office. Whatever became of that investigation?
Well,
Speaking of-
I think it's stalled. I haven't heard any progress on that at all. But I think it's a very germane investigation that's going to lead to opening up a huge can of worms that the government really doesn't want to get out because it's going to expose so much in so many different areas and just really wreak havoc on our economy, on the way the American citizens think about their government. So it's a real big can of worms that they want to keep covered up. But as far as Cheney goes, what did Conor O'Ryan say in testimony to you on that videotape? What was one of the key people he saw within the S4 facility on level 2?
He said he saw him standing there wearing a white coat with another man wearing a white coat with their hands in their pockets looking at one of the discs in Bay 7.
So he actually identified Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense at that time in 1991, as being within the S4 facility on level 2 and doing an inspection throughout the S4 facility there. So he actually, that was the one person who he did recognize. He saw two others who he thought he had seen pictures of before, but he wasn't able to identify them, but he did identify Cheney.
Well, you know, when
So
Seymour,
Cheney
yes.
is there in S4, and Conor O'Ryan says he's an assassin working out of S4. 18 years later, you got Seymour Hersh saying that Cheney was running an assassination ring out of the White House. So you have 18 years apart, two different allegations. Seymour Hersh, very credible reporter.
And right when other people were wrong. We've got 2 minutes to the
Dennis
closing roll.
Kucinich, who felt Seymour Hersh's allegations were so important, a two-time presidential candidate, that he brought it up to the House Oversight Chairman and wanted to initiate an investigation.
What a beautiful way to conceal government assassins.
Boy, there you go.
You hide them in a place like S4 where no one can get in.
There you go. You know, we need to have a second show on this, but I wanted to give the contact information for you really quick, Rick, if we can. Your website is UFOhypothesis.com. There it is on the screen.
That's the plural, yeah.
Yes, hypothesis, not hypothesis, hypotheses.com.
There you go.
His email address is rick@UFOhypotheses.com. For Cosmic Chronicles information, you can contact us through our email address, cosmicmesa@azaliens.com.
And I'd like to, at this point, bring up Kathy Star Eagle and Tom Morello's book, Mesa. And you got a chance to read their book,
I read
did
it.
you?
It's well written.
And
They're authors, but it's very well written, and it's a most remarkable story about how events are brought together by synchronicity, so they work out for a major objective.
About too.
Yes.
I think some major synchronicity happened to allow this program to actually occur today.
And I have to make a quick announcement. This is going, as of this show, this is going to be my last show for a little while. I'm due to personal obligations and the financial situation and everything, I need to take a several-month hiatus from the show, or I was going to put in for a retirement from the show, but if Tom and Kathy want to retain me, that would be awesome. I'd love to be at the show. It's been wonderful. I'm working on a book of my own right now about my advertising dolls, and I'm going to focus on that and take care of my family life. And also,
good luck on that, Kyle.
Adrienne Lane is the young lady that you're going to be hearing singing. My Heart Will Go On. Young lady, local lady, she's from Mesa, very beautiful young woman there, got a beautiful voice. You can contact me, Kyle, at behindtheparanormal.com if you're interested in any more of her music. This is My Heart Will Go On from the film Titanic, sung by Adrienne Lane.
Wendelle, thank you so much for being so brave for all of us and enduring so much hardship for all of us to bring this information out. I respect you so much.
Thank you. Me too.
We need to have you on another show. Thank you, Wendelle. Thank you, Rick. Thank you very much. You guys did great. We covered most every bit of the information we wanted to talk about.
That was a good job.
Across the distance and spaces between.